Well, g'day everybody out there across internet land. It's Benjamin Morgan from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia. And this afternoon here at 2 p.m. Saturday, we've put together a special opportunity to sit down and have a discussion with none other than Queensland Senator Susan McDonald. Now, Susan McDonald has been a great friend to General Aviation since she was elected into the Parliament and has really started to earn her place amongst the I guess the superstars of General Aviation with the work that she's been doing with the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee as its chairperson. And as someone who would understand the volume of the concerns that the industry has, I'm very certain that Susan gets it. And she's been doing some fabulous work through the General Aviation Inquiry of recent. And just this past week, that inquiry has handed down its recommendations. And we've asked Susan to come along today to join us for that discussion. So I'll bring Susan in. Welcome, Susan, to AOPA Live.
It is great to be talking to you, Ben. I follow your program, your shows, and, I really appreciate the work that you're doing to represent, so many smaller businesses, particularly the ones who feel that they don't have a voice otherwise. So, yeah, pleased to be here.
Well, look, Susan, thank you very much for the kind words. This is all about general aviation. And as you've just said, it's about small businesses. It's about hardworking, everyday Australians right across the country that are involved in the aviation industry. And quite often, aviation really doesn't rate much of a mention because it's one of those industries where we professionally go about our work Monday to Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and we're often not seen. But the issues that our industry face from an airport's perspective, an airspace perspective, and from a regulatory perspective are very real. And in some cases, the concerns are so extreme because the consequences of what's happening can result in pressures on these businesses and pressures on pilots and aircraft owners to a point where it shuts them down and quite literally puts them out of business. And so obviously over the time since you've been elected to Parliament, you've received no end of communication from myself, and I know many of my colleagues in the other industry bodies have been directing their inquiries to you. Being involved with the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee, could you maybe give us a little bit of background on the purpose of the committee, the role that you've been playing there and what you're trying to achieve?
Thanks, Ben. And look, perhaps I could just start too, for all those people who don't know me, just giving you a bit of a background into why I'm passionate about this work that we're doing. So I grew up outside Mount Isa on a cattle station where General Aviation was, bread and butter for running that business, for mustering cattle, for moving people around, for getting sick people to hospital. Qantas was established as a good idea on the banks of the Cloncurry River. The School of the Air and the Flying Doctor are all integral parts of that part of the country. And so I grew up thinking and knowing that general aviation was a very important part of the ecosystem of aviation right across the country. Also, tragically, I lost 3 family members in a commercial accident in 1966 before I was born, but it has marked the way we think about aviation. And I probably fly as much as most people in the world currently. I'm on a plane, every second or third day, big, small, and in the middle. So I'm passionate about this industry, about how critical it is to both our nation and the world. So when I was appointed as chair of the Regional Rural and Transport Affairs Committee, it was a dream come true because we get to talk about the important issues for the important part of the country, which is regional Australia, where we, grow our agriculture, do our mining, and have our great communities. And so the work we've been doing reflects the interest of all the committee members. And when we had the opportunity to do a self-referral into the health of the general aviation industry, I leapt at it. Now, there's a couple of issues that made it really hard, though. It was really hard to get people to come forward and talk about particularly the regulator. And this wasn't just about the regulators. It's a broader issue of the whole ecosystem for general aviation and how that feeds into flying schools, pilots, engineers, the physical space of airports and airfields and airspaces, as you've already identified. So this committee has had some challenges about getting enough evidence publicly. We had a lot of evidence privately, and I had a lot of people coming to me from the regulator, from industry as well, saying, I want to tell you this, I want to give you this information, but I don't want to put my head above the parapet, which is interesting in itself. So we had a great deal of content to them as we got traction and people could see what we were trying to do. And we've now delivered an interim report just last week, which I'm pretty proud of. I think it goes a fair way to shining a light on the critical issues.
And Susan, or I shouldn't say Susan, Senator McDonald, the framework for that particular inquiry was really focused on looking at, I guess, for want of a better phrase, the culture of the way in which the general aviation industry was being regulated, to try and examine much of the feedback that had been given and look at the examples in terms of how were businesses, how are individuals being treated. Was there evidence, and was there repeating evidence of certain patterns and behaviours? I mean, your reflection on the inquiry, and I imagine there's probably some things you can say and some things you can't say, but just generally your reflection on the body of work that's been submitted by the aviation community. Do you feel that the concerns and the claims of the industry to be legitimate?
Oh, yes, I do. And the reason why I do is that so much evidence came forward of individuals who were saying how difficult it was to deal with the regulator, as well as how difficult it was to interpret the, between the legislation, the policies, the guidelines, the circulars, how complex that was. Now, I think that any regulation, in order for it to be effective in the outcomes that it's trying to achieve, as well as affordable, there needs to be a good interaction. There needs to be transparency of regulation and their purpose. And that's the bit, I think, where we were getting really stuck, is that even some of the bigger small operators were telling me that they were hiring lawyers to try and interpret those new regulations that are coming out, and still not able to understand exactly what they should be doing. It's costing thousands and thousands more dollars to comply. And that, I don't believe, is the purpose of what the regulator's trying to do. If the regulator's purpose is to have a safe industry, and I've got some views on the missing part of who's actually growing and ensuring that this is a prosperous, vibrant, growing, important industry. But if safety is your concern, then you've got to make it easy for people to comply and to understand what it is you're seeking to get them to do. Otherwise, what happens is what I'm observing, which is people either stepping back from regulation and possibly working outside the system, or just leaving the industry altogether. What a tragedy that is.
Well, we have a fantastic international example of how to run an aviation economy, and we only need to look to the United States to see just how successful general aviation truly can be. And it's often been a bugbear of mine, and I'm going to smile slightly as I say this, because I'm reflecting on 6 years in some cases of belting my head against the wall to get CASA, or encourage CASA, towards an outcome where they simply look to some of these leading nations and just say, well, how about we just adopt that, instead of taking a unique Australian approach and trying to mash it into something that no one else uses. How about we just adopt frameworks that are known to be working and are known to be successful, and to put them into action? And unfortunately, Susan, Senator McDonald, you see right across the regulatory suite example after example after example, where if we had simply done that, we wouldn't be having the trouble that we're having today. But I watch yourself and I watch your Senate colleagues through the inquiries and the sessions in Parliament House there. You're putting the questions on CASA. You're seeking to understand why that they won't do these things, but they just don't seem to give an answer. And one of the things that I think is very frustrating for many people across the aviation industry is we watch your efforts, we watch the efforts of your colleagues. You'll ask very specific questions. CASA will be required by the Senate to provide follow-up evidence and documentation to justify why they've taken certain decisions. An example of that would be the refusal of CASA to issue the self-certification medical to Part 61 RPL PPL holders, as they have done for RAOs RPC holders. CASA are telling you, we'll get back to you, we'll provide you our risk assessments, but they never turn up. So, what's your thoughts on that? What tools and resources do you have available to follow that up, to ensure that that evidence does come back before the Senate and the public gets an opportunity to see what CASA believes is justifying their continual refusals?
Well, look, I guess what I should say, in the interest of fairness, is that I think we made a terrible mistake when we changed our Civil Aviation Authority to a Civil Aviation and Safety Authority. We changed the legislation and we took tools away from that body to be, to be an efficient aviation industry. Safety is a cloak of, regulatory darkness, I think, because it's very hard to argue safety. If we want to be safe, well then, what's the next comment? You're right about the FAA, and New Zealand has adopted that model. PNG, I understand, has even taken it one step further and really got a very successful outcome there. My observation there would be most of general aviation doesn't engage with overseas models. And so when you have this discussion about what's happening overseas, they've got no visibility of that. And the big operators, the airlines and those ones who are operating overseas, have got enough resources that they've got, solicitors and lawyers and chief pilots and risk managers and all the additional people who, it may not be easy, it may be expensive, but they're able to wade their way through that process. So, I think we've made a mistake in the way we've written the legislation in Australia. We've actually taken away the purpose of encouraging aviation and growing aviation. Instead, we've brought it down to this very narrow target of safety. I mean, if we were so focused on safety, we just wouldn't let people fly. And we're very grateful for the high standards that we've got in this country. I flew in a storm into Brisbane from Cairns the other afternoon, and I was very grateful for the level of professionalism and standards that we've got in this country, but we shouldn't have it that only Qantas and Virgin and overseas operators are able to afford to operate. That's not the purpose of an aviation industry.
Well, I'm sure I could occupy 5 hours of your time and then some. I'm told I'm like a submarine. I can talk underwater on this issue, and I'd love to really spend so many hours publicly talking about it, but I want to step through a few other topics. I'm not going to go through all of the recommendations one by one with you, Susan, because we just don't have time. We're very appreciative of the time you have given us on a Saturday. But there's two recommendations in this that I think are really a standout. And one is to have the headline of the Civil Aviation Act amended to incorporate the development and the sustainability of aviation here in Australia and whatnot. And I think that that's a really important issue. It's an issue that AOPA took to our General Aviation Summit in 2017, and we had the then Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack attend that session, and we really were trying to impress upon him how critically important it is. And so I thank you very much for recognising the work that we had done as being part of the work that you're now doing. And so there's a consistency there, and hopefully the current Deputy Prime Minister can look at this and understand this is a repeating theme, and it needs to be adopted. The second one, which I want to just identify and just talk very briefly about, it's one I'm very passionate about. And again, I know there's so many people across Australia so thankful that this has been included, and that is that a recommendation to create a independent industry complaints commission that is external to CASA and that has the powers to properly investigate, and I would assume recommend then for further action and potential prosecution should they be finding examples of corruption or examples of collusion, examples of the intentional mismanagement or an intentional lack of decision making that is causing harm and damage to the industry. Obviously this is in my opinion, this is a fairly large recommendation, and it's a recommendation that unless the Deputy Prime Minister really puts his teeth into, it's probably not going to go anywhere. And I really would like to get your understanding that these are your recommendations from your committee. They're obviously things that you do believe in. How are we going to move these issues forward? How do we ensure that these go from being a recommendation to a required implementation?
Well, I guess, to be brutally honest, the most important thing is to return a coalition government, because I've done a lot of work with the Deputy Prime Minister. I've taken him to lots of meetings, particularly in North Queensland, my part of the world, to talk about the hands-on challenges for businesses. And, you're right, we could talk all day about, I remember when the Mount Isa Airport was privatised, a few years ago, the first thing that went out was to tell all the private aircraft they couldn't be on the tarmac tie-down area anymore. They were off on the gravel. It's small, and that should have been a flag And it's only looking back now that I see that's the first step into pushing GA, the less profitable part of the industry, off into the sticks or even off the airfield. But of course, they're the people who keep the maintenance teams and the flying schools operational and builds the rest of the industry. But I'm getting off topic. So the first thing is making sure that the Deputy Prime Minister, who understands this and believes this, thanks to the work of AOPA, thanks to the work of terrific advisors like Anita Taylor and boards and other people who've talked to him, as well as small businesses, he is committed to following through on improvements to the industry. I can't speak for him, obviously, but I believe he is very supportive of understanding that there is a problem. And so of these regulations, some come with dollars, but some, I mean, I think really tellingly is the people who are coming out of the regulator, out of CASA, they're saying to me things like, jobs in CASA used to be filled by technical people who understood what was the impact of the regulation and circulars they were writing. Now, because there are so many administrative and departmental people going into those roles, people don't know what they don't know, and then they can't give clear advice. And of course, the haven for when people don't know what to do, the safe haven is process. So then you dive into this, well, you better fill in this form and tick this box, and we better review that, and we'll get back to you in 12 months. So we have allowed this to happen. And so the recommendations around the independent body, I think, are important, but I hope that that is a temporary measure, because if we can fix the culture and the structure of the regulations, we should be able to move through this and look back on this as a period that we don't want to reach.
I think importantly, Senator, is that there is also, unfortunately, there is also a cache of legacy issues that need to be correctly dealt with. And I think until some of those key legacy concerns with certain industry personalities, persons, businesses are properly addressed and accounted for, there will always be a significant trust divide that is between CASA and industry. And, you know, you and I have spoken about how important it is that CASA is rebuilt to have a strong and binding relationship with industry, that safety demands a relationship that is two-way, a relationship where both understand each other and both can rely on one another. So I think that this recommendation is very powerful, and I'm really impressed that the work that you've done through this inquiry has led to this and a number of other recommendations there, which if I had more time, I would dive right into. And we are, just a note with respect to the Deputy Prime Minister, I might have gotten off to a bit of a rocky start with the Deputy Prime Minister, but I am very much appreciative of the fact that he is taking an interest in these aviation issues. And it's often lost on people within the aviation industry, because aviation is our world and it's everything to us. And so every small issue is a major issue for us. But the Deputy Prime Minister and the government and, of course, Cabinet are dealing with the entire nation's issues. And so they have to find a way to move our aviation concerns in, and they have to be able to get a rank of priority. And I guess that should highlight just the next set of comments and questions, which centre on Moorabbin Airport, which is that the Deputy Prime Minister came out this week and has announced that the 5-year master plan put forward by Moorabbin Airport Corporation has in fact been rejected. This is truly significant. And I was saying to you earlier that I believe this is the first time that the Liberal National Coalition as a government have rejected a 5-year master plan at a privatised airport. That in itself represents a significant amount of work that was undertaken by key stakeholders and representative organisations across the board on this issue. But it wouldn't have been, I guess all of that work would have amounted to nothing if we didn't have our senators and our elected members focused on the issue. So do you have any comments in relation to what's happened at Moorabbin? I know you've been involved in a number of discussions there.
Yeah, well, you know, Moorabbin is just one airport that is master planning its site. I think we failed to ensure that in the Airports Act that we identified the critical importance of general aviation and why that needs to be prioritised, whether it be engineering businesses, flying schools, or recreational, you know, people who just enjoy flying. These are all important parts of an airfield environment. And so I've seen too many examples now of private operators, of small businesses being forced out of their local airfield spaces. And now that we have a pilot shortage, now following COVID, and so many pilots have exited the industry because they're at that stage of their life, we should all care very much that we have failed to be bringing forward a crew who will take over into the future, because we don't want everybody trained in simulators. We don't want everybody only ever knowing a glass cockpit. We want people to know how to fly, whether it be for the sheer joy of it or because it is an important part of our safety program that we're talking about. So Moorabbin is one example of airfields that are using commercial negotiations as a cloak for pushing less profitable parts of the industry out, but it is the grassroots that from there everything else grows. And so I support the Deputy Prime Minister's decision to reject that master plan and hope that Moorabbin hears that this is not about noisy voices, this is not about emotion, this is about the way you build a successful aviation industry is to have a very vibrant, populated, prosperous grassroots. And for that reason, we need to be thinking about all the airfields right across Australia, how they are prioritising general aviation and understanding its importance, its critical importance in the industry.
So as a senator that has the unique opportunity of sitting at inquiries, and sometimes, Senator McDonald, I sit on the other side of the TV screen just wishing to God I could sit there and ask the questions. Probably does not come as a surprise to you. But I had recently the opportunity to meet Janet Quigley from the Department of Infrastructure, who heads up airports. And it was I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to meet Janet, and it was a wonderful. It was wonderful that she took the call straight away and she organised a meeting immediately. However, I did leave the meeting desperately concerned that it really does appear that the Department of Infrastructure has a better role to play in supervising what's going on at these capital city general aviation privatised airports. I know that she she came before an inquiry recently, and there were a range of questions asked, and she put forward some evidence to say that Department of Infrastructure believes that it is in fact managing the sustainability balance between non-aviation and aviation. And of course, recently I've been shooting a lot of videos showing the wholesale lack of maintenance right across Bankstown and Camden airports, and really what is quite a tragic and disastrous situation for aviation there. So whilst I had the meeting and you weren't privy to it, I guess, do you feel that infrastructure could be playing a better role here? And is there a role for the Senate RRAT in trying to bring some further pressure to bear on these departments, not to attack Janet, but to simply try and drive a greater focus as to the issues and the need for better outcomes?
And so you raise a good point, because that there is an example of a department official, along with so many people across departments and CASA, who are great people, good people, trying their very hardest. But we are all a reflection of what it is that our lived experience and what we know. I think somehow we have failed to properly communicate this concept of why flying schools at airfields is important, and why engineers and general aviation at airports is important. And so with the absence of that understanding, then that doesn't go into regulation or KPIs put to airports about what success looks like. And so when it disappears and the department is told, oh, well, we're keeping this space available, but because of commercial pressures, these businesses have left, the department has got no tool in their bag to say, well, we agree that 30% of the businesses on this site would be general aviation and they would have this mix, or whatever it might be. But we need to get back to that, because it is very difficult to expect them to prioritise in the way that we would like them to if we've not written the legislation the right way in the first place, and that we're not constantly talking about it. And so the work that AOPA does, you are a very noisy person, Ben, and you are persistent. And the industry should be very grateful for the work that you do, because, there are days when there are 1,000 priorities, exactly as you say, coming towards senators and members of parliament. And we try and deal with them all, but, it does help if there's a noisy person saying, don't forget, this is critical and this is the impact of bad decision making. So on Monday, we'll be having estimates again, and I have flagged to the Secretary of the Department yesterday or the day before when we had estimates that I would be asking questions around the process of approvals for airports. And so we'll start looking at that more closely, because that has been a bit that I hadn't understood. I hadn't understood what exactly was happening. I was hearing funny stories, businesses being allowed to go in at Archerfield that were not compatible with aircraft engines. Goodness, that is a problem. And so how do we, as a government, ensure the departments have the right tools and the right priorities so that they understand what it is that they're regulating and managing for?
An issue that's obviously a little bit closer to you being a Queensland Senator, and you're a great Queensland Senator, and to everybody that is watching this broadcast live today, and of course those that will get the opportunity to watch it after it's live, Senator Susan McDonald is a great friend to General Aviation, and you've been an enormous supporter, not just of General Aviation. You've been quite a good supporter of AOPA behind the scenes and encouraging myself to keep up the efforts and to focus on the important issues. So anyone out there that is inclined towards our Liberal national government, and especially the National Party, that would like to see many of these initiatives brought forward, don't be afraid to get out and show your support for Susan and her party at the upcoming election. But an issue, Senator, that is close to home is at Sunshine Coast Airport in Queensland. Sunshine Coast Airport's not a privatised airport that's managed by the Department of Infrastructure with a private leaseholder. It's an airport that was handed over to a local council, and then a local council made a decision to then create a business or a relationship with a private business to run the airport side. And we've got great aviation businesses located up there, and one of those businesses is involved in the emergency helicopter operations, and very well-known, an extremely well-known business that provides an enormous slice of community service for emergency operations. That business has been trying to secure land at the airport to build additional hangars and facilities to increase the size of that Australian-owned, Australian-operated business, and has been continually told by the airport operator. In fact, I received some emails from the business today confirming in writing that they were in fact told there's no land available. And this comes literally a week after the airport announced that it has removed airport airside land from the airport plan and has turned it into non-aviation, and has now leased a very large slice of that land to create a brewery. I mean, this is part of a national pattern. It's part of a broader concern and issue here, that the airport's infrastructure nationally are slowly being eroded and eaten away at the edges. But the problem and challenge that you have as a government is that these airports were handed to these local councils, and effectively the local councils have the freedom to go and do these things. I mean, this must present a huge challenge for the federal government, especially in times such as what we're in now, where our national security and the sovereignty and defence of the country is starting to come into question with the broader geopolitical issues that are going on. I mean, how do we attack this? I mean, as someone who sits in an inquiry position, I mean, how do we approach this challenge to get a meaningful outcome?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. The first is that is absolutely outrageous, because when the community finds out that there is nowhere for their emergency helicopters to be suitably housed, where there's no airstrips dotted all over, little suburbs around the country. So we rely more and more on helicopters and that sort of technology. But emergency services, for goodness sake, that makes me very cranky, and I will follow up on that. But it is a broader discussion. We will start it on Monday with the department. I'll talk to the Deputy Prime Minister about whether or not we need to do a deeper dive on an inquiry. But I'm aware of the same issue in Broome, airports that aren't under as much geographic pressure as somewhere like the Sunshine Coast. But again, I think we always want to solve, to a man with a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. Just because you're in Parliament, the whole world shouldn't look like a piece of legislation that's coming. There are other ways to communicate priorities, and I think we need to be, I'll talk to the Mayor, and there will no doubt be opportunities to run some stories in the paper about this is not national planning. This is not a good planning process, and we will look back at that decision and say that was a failure of us to prioritise a very important industry, and we let that, the divide in the road, we took the wrong direction. But anyway, we haven't given away everything yet, but we need to be focusing on prioritising aviation as an industry, airfields as landing spots, and that's just such a perfect example. Imagine not being able to have emergency services aircraft at the airport. You know, that is mad.
Senator, it goes far deeper than this. I mean, I don't make it known too publicly my business interests outside of AOPA, but I am involved as a director of a company called Falcon Air. We operate Dassault Falcon 900 aircraft, and we have our own charter approvals and also our own engineering approvals for the business. And we're located at Bankstown Airport in Sydney. We lease our facilities from Sydney Metro Airports, and we're having a dispute right now because we can't even get water. I mean, the privatised leaseholder turns around and says, we leased you the property as is. If you need to sort that out, it's all at your expense. I mean, we're paying astronomical rents on these facilities that each year the property managers contrive ways to just keep increasing it and putting further cost pressures on it. And we can't even get basic facilities. I mean, the internal floors in the hangar are virtually destroyed, and we've had to, at our own cost, go and repair facilities that belong to the taxpayer. They don't belong to us. We inherited broken, busted facilities, and we're told we have to bear the improvement costs. I mean, the situation is quite literally out of control. And right now at Bankstown, they were approved under the last master plan to execute a $500 million non-aviation real estate development on the southern side. They've executed that, and if you take a drive through it, it looks stunning. It's beautiful. They've spent millions, and you take a drive through the airports, they're disgraceful. They're run down, they're decrepit. And we're expected to try and bring customers to these facilities. And I think I noted in one of the videos I did this last week, I said, imagine if you're a new customer to a flight training school and you drive onto this airport and you look at the buildings, you've got to be thinking to yourself, are these companies fly-by-nighters? Is this like, I've come back, as I said, it looks like you're in Nairobi. It's just horrible. And now they've started a non-aviation development on the northern side of the airport. And they haven't even been honest about that. That development that they're undertaking was originally approved under an MDP something like 7 years ago. So it would have had a valuation at the time that qualified it for an MDP development project. But now 7 years later, it hasn't gone back for review. They're executing the plan. And I believe we're probably standing on the precipice of losing another 25 aviation facilities. So the interest of the reason I say this to you is I don't expect you to have answers for us here today. And I'm certainly not asking for an opinion on that. But I think the interest of the Deputy Prime Minister on these airports, it could not come at a more poignant time. We really need Barnaby's tough and decisive decision-making on this. And I think if there's a politician in the Australian Parliament that has the gris to just make the decision to pull the brakes up on all of this and then take a good look at it and get the metrics right and get the framework right, it will be Barnaby. I think too many other politicians would be a little bit too weak at the knees, but he strikes me as being the kind of guy, and the Nationals strike me as a party that would be prepared to get on with this, because it's really about saving a national industry. We can't afford to lose general aviation. As you've eloquently stated at the start of this conversation, it feeds so many other markets and industry. And I think that COVID has shown the nation how important aviation is to both the economy and the fabric of the country.
Well, look, what I will say to you is that airfields right across Australia have a lovely nostalgic feel. You feel like, Charles Kingsford Smith could walk out of one of the hangars at any point and you would recognise it. It would not have changed. And we get used to that. We're used to seeing these kind of ageing facilities, and I think it's beholden on government to send clear signals to investors that, fine, if you're going to take on one of these assets, an airfield, you have to understand it's not a property development. You are the custodians of a critical piece of infrastructure for a critical industry of ours. And we have to send that signal early, because people are investing based on valuations that are not around aviation. So I think that with this decision at Moorabbin last week, that is the first signal, and that is the right and proper thing for government to do. Let people know early, hey, whatever you're planning, you just need to know that aviation and aviation businesses have to be prioritised, because they will ensure that we have Australian pilots, Australian engineers, in our big airlines, in the Air Force, in mid and small businesses right across the country. And I just am reflecting on the people who the only way they could get around during COVID, cardiologists, dentists, mechanics, all sorts of important people who are critical to the operation in regional Australia. The only way they could get there was on either a private charter or a friend's plane, or and so the hours of general aviation went up during COVID because it was suddenly everybody realised that you couldn't be catching a bus, so we could be catching a bus, but no, actually I don't think even buses were running, because my point being, we live in a big country and we do a lot of work a long way away from metros.
Well, look, Senator Susan McDonald, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this one-on-one interview. Boy, we've come far. We've come far.
It's been a great journey, but unfortunately, you don't have the opportunity to get as much time with every senator and every member of parliament. If you did, then I think we'd have a very different place in the parliament thinking about aviation. Let's work on that in the next parliament, how we get everybody excited about aviation again.
Well, we've discussed some great initiatives around building stronger relationships between the senators in parliament and members with the aviation industry. They're discussions I'm going to look forward to taking up with you when you're re-elected and driving into the new parliamentary term. I think there are some brilliant ways that we can build a great coalition and caucus of supporting members and senators. I think aviation is a very sensible industry. It's a very stable industry. It's one worth protecting, and it's why I do what I do. It's a great industry to be involved in, and it is full of great people. And thank you so much for the support that you've given us through this period. I really do wish you all the best in your re-election campaign, not only yourself, but with the Nationals. As I've said, it's not for AOPA to tell people who to vote for. However, those of you that are watching the broadcast, you know where your political alignments are, and if so inclined, I do encourage you to get out there, make yourself seen, and support Susan and support her colleagues. I certainly will be having some conversations personally, Susan, about what I can be doing to help, because I'd like to see these reforms. I'd like to see this agenda completed. It's been I can say this for myself. It has been an incredible 6 years to represent the aviation industry, and a real honour to be able to take the issues to Parliament House, and to put them before senators and MPs. Not always the answer we want from them, but you're right with one thing: I'm bloody tenacious, and I will keep chiseling away at it, because I think that the end result is absolutely worth it. So thank you very much again on behalf of our members, our board of directors, and for everyone that's joined us today.
It's a privilege. All right, have a great weekend.
Thank you. Okay, there you go, guys. Senator Susan McDonald joining us live for AOPA discussion on a Saturday. I guess that in itself should be a fairly remarkable achievement for AOPA. But honestly, what a great senator, what a great supporter we have for general aviation in Parliament. I understand that they have the next Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee, that's a mouthful, hearing, which is coming up on Monday. And we'll be looking forward to watching them back behind the desk with our aviation departments and regulators. Those of you out there, if you are in support of AOPA Australia, I certainly hope that you are. We really want you to become a member of the association. Jump online, www.aopa.com.au/membership. And until next time, it's Ben Morgan from AOPA.